The governor's budget address was historic in some ways because this is the first time that Vermont's total budget has exceeded $5 billion when you include federal funds. Now, we've always been Vermont strong, but it's time that we become Vermont smart, and I think this budget falls short in that regard. The governor talked about a number of things, but I think what's most striking are the things that he didn't talk about. He didn't talk about health care and the ongoing costs associated with the attempt to move to single payer, and those costs are not insubstantial. Today, for example, we saw for the first time an RFP issued by the Green Mountain Care Board that calls for the hiring of a public relations and marketing company experienced in, quote, message control, unquote. I didn't realize that Act 48 included a division of propaganda. We argued long and hard in the debate last year about reducing the cost of health care by reducing advertising and public relations expense. And I'm amazed and astounded that the first RFP that they issue is for advertising and public relations expense. And he didn't talk about that. He didn't talk at all about energy and this move to a green and renewable energy future. An energy future that, according to the Public Service Board, will add somewhere between $300 million and $450 million in cost to ratepayers over the next 20 years. Not mentioning and also not counting the additional costs of cogeneration because of this move to unreliable and not necessarily baseload power. He didn't talk about that at all. He talked about the high cost of education, but what he didn't talk about is the notion that over the past 10 years, education costs have increased per pupil by 149.9%. And despite all of the so-called cuts that we talk about, if you look at the audited financial statements, you'll see that education cost has increased every year. And you'll see that the general fund cost this year in the 2013 budget is up over 5%. But he didn't talk about that. He's mentioned before that he's going to cut the state workforce by asking, well, not necessarily cut the state workforce, but cut the total amount of money that agencies are to spend by 4%. He didn't talk about that. But across-the-board cuts in a time in which we've had cuts year after year after year is not the best way to achieve results. It might have been appropriate in past years when we picked the low-hanging fruit, but it's not appropriate now when we're cutting into muscle. There's some things in government you have to do exceptionally well. There are other things that perhaps you may have to decide you won't do at all. And those are the tough decisions, and we didn't discuss any of those tough decisions today. We talked about education and the high cost of education, but the best they could come up with was consolidating some supervisory unions and save $9 million. Well, $9 million on a $1.4 billion a year budget is 0.6%. If that's the best we can do in controlling education costs, we have a real problem. So I don't want to take all the time, though I know that some of my colleagues have some comments that they'd like to make as well.
Thank you very much, Senator. Good afternoon. I'm Representative Brian Savage. I'm the Assistant House Minority Leader. As far as the GOP caucus is concerned, the governor's proposals mentioned in his budget address today. But I'd like to mention some other areas that we noticed that were not mentioned as, in addition to those that Senator Brock put forward. There was no mention on anything to do with any agricultural program. And last year in his remarks, the agricultural programs were going to be the forefront, to build job growth and create job growth within Vermont, which was tied to agriculture. There was no mention of that. We also found it odd, as Senator Brock has pointed out, there was also no mention of the health care reform, and it is certain and very likely in the upcoming fiscal year that there will more than likely be some money expended, and that was not mentioned, and how much that would be in this budget. Please keep in mind, we have not seen, as of yet, as of the address, we did not see an actual printed copy of the proposed budget. Roads and bridges, I thought we were very much in agreement with. We all knew that roads and bridges throughout the state, pre-Irene, were in pretty bad shape. And we're good, and we're happy to see that there will be some aggressive plans put forward with which to improve our roads and bridges. As far as the permit and consolidation plans, permit reform in the supervisor union consolidation plan, we like what he had to say about that, but let's see what happens. Both of these proposals have been talked about in prior administrations, and here we are, we're still talking about it. War and recidivism in the correctional system. Obviously, we want to reduce the amount of recidivism in the system. We're all for that. However, we must be cautious. And as a legislator from my home district, Swanton, that is next door to the St. Albans or the Northwest Correctional Facility, we must be careful that the local communities, the local police departments are not going to be overburdened through that program. And in closing, we would just like to mention that we do agree that this is we have a lot of issues. This needs bipartisan support. But let's work through these issues. And I thank you all for your time. And now I'd like to turn it over to Senator Flory.
Thank you. I was asked if I would come and give the Senate Republican response. And most of it's been said already. Let me go over a few of the things that we agree with in the governor's proposal. We agree, and frankly, we're really glad to hear him address the area of consolidation of supervisory districts, something we've been trying to do for a number of years. We want to see if it's going to happen. We agree, and we're really happy to hear him talk about public high school choice. It's something we've been pushing for years. Let's see if he can make that happen. We agree completely with his statement on permit reform. Should be swift, predictable, and fair. Let's see if he can make that happen. Some of the concerns we had in his address, and again, we haven't seen the budget, and we've been trying to frantically go over it. But one of the areas that hit us was on the education tax. You know, up here we make decisions one year that have effects each of the next couple of years. It's really easy to forget that sometimes we create the problem that then the next year we're up here pretending we're fixing. What we did last year is we made a transfer from the general fund. We did that in order to arguably keep the education tax from going higher. In the last 3 years, we've asked our schools to level fund, and they've done it. They've worked hard to do it. What happened last year is we put money in there, so it helped them. So not only are we asking them, or the governor asking them, to level fund again this year, but it's actually without that $27.1 million into it. So it's a reduction. We're asking them to come down, and I'm not sure how many years we can go to our school boards and ask them to decrease their costs. What's disturbing is if they do it, and if it meets all of the ideal parameters that the governor set out, because the way our income sensitivity is structured, it's on the basic education support number. When that number doesn't go up as required, the benefit received by the income sensitized property taxpayer is less. So what it means is taxes won't go up for anyone that isn't income sensitized. But those that are income sensitized get less of a credit. They're going to pay more. I don't think that's what the intent is. So a lot of good things in the governor's proposal. It's a little disturbing that it's still up 5.1% over last year. I've been trying to run quickly through the numbers, and I've come up with, from what he said in the speech, another $60 million going into the budget. I haven't found where that money's coming from. And I'd really be interested to know where that is. If it's not broad-based taxes, I want to know who all of a sudden is going to give us an extra $60 million. Thank you.
We'd like to thank you all for coming today. Are there any questions?
Senator Flory, the governor seems to think that the money you're talking about is going to come from increased revenues because of the recovering economy. They're talking about, I think, revenues, general fund revenues going up 6.4%, if I'm not mistaken. Do you doubt that's going to happen?
I have some real concerns that that's not going to happen. I haven't seen numbers that reflect that yet. I hope it does.
Representative Turner, we spoke last week and you said you thought you were listening to a Republican governor. Do you feel the same way today?
I think there were a lot of issues that the governor spoke of that we would be in support of. It's laid out by Representative Savage. The permit information, predictability in permitting, consolidating or converting the Commissioner of Education or Secretary of Education, Commissioner to Secretary is something that's been talked about. We do support that. So there are many things I think that we can support, and we hope to get the support in a bipartisan manner as the governor's asked.
There were some concerns voiced in the Free Press yesterday among some Republican representatives that because of the huge majority of Democrats, that this administration would get pretty much anything they want. Do you echo that sentiment?
Well, they definitely have the numbers. We really can't stop anything. We can inform the public. We're going to do that. We're going to make sure we point out any increases in taxes, any new programs we can implement, and we're going to point those out as well.
What's the plan to stay relevant without the numbers?
We have to educate the people of Vermont and let them know what's happening. We're going to do that in every opportunity we have. We're going to use the media, and thank you all for coming today to do that. But we have to make sure people understand what's happening here in Vermont. Thank you.
What about the plan for an increase in the state office complex plan?
Well, we have spoke out that we were promoting a smaller work centers closer to clients that need those services. So we're not sure what this means. How many people AHS is going to consolidate everybody in one facility? So we're interested to see what that proposal really going to look like.
Senator Brock, you mentioned being concerned about cutting into the muscle of some programs. Are there programs that you would hope to see expanded that were not?
Well, clearly we have to do a good job doing a number of things. And among the things that come to mind are protection of life and property is an area in which we have to do very well. Dealing with people who are, as we define, our most vulnerable, people who need the help of government in order to live. Those things are very important, and they should go to the top of the list. We haven't really had the discussion, though, about what should move down on the list. And there are ways to cut. One of the ways to cut is the across-the-board cut, which is what we've done. The other way to cut is to be very targeted and to define what is it that we absolutely have to do, that we have to do magnificently. And then what are the things that are perhaps good but less important to do? And we haven't made that tough choice of force ranking them. That's something I think the administration should do. I think that's something the legislature should do. In terms of making decisions on how we relocate employees, again, what this proposal largely does is it takes the same silos that we have right now and puts them together. When really what happens so often in government is we have to look across organizational lines for all of those parts of other organizations that have to work well with each other. And again, one of the clues is look at the number of coordinators that we have to have within these silos. And whenever you have coordinators, it's because things aren't well coordinated. We need to take a good hard look at how we put things together in a much more logical way than simply moving the silos around on the chalkboard.
Do you support the governor's proposal to give law enforcement access to the prescription drug database?
I have some concerns about that proposal, both from the privacy standpoint and the Fourth Amendment standpoint. But I believe there's a way to achieve that. Now, one of the ways to achieve it is, again, to use data. Because the problem is that you don't know so often what it is you're looking for until you find it. Using data is one way to do it is to analyze all of your claims to identify suspicious patterns where it's obvious based on the data, not individual specific, that a particular individual identified, let's say, by a number, which is the way the system in Medicaid works right now, is abusing opiate drugs. At that point, law enforcement can get a warrant to get that information involving that particular case. And that's a way in which we can deal, I think, with the privacy issue without giving law enforcement unbridled access to thumb through everybody's medical records, which I think rightly people are concerned about. I think there's a way to solve the problem.
Do you think there's any instance in which law enforcement should have access to that kind of information without a warrant? Do you think they should always have to get it?
I'd certainly want to hear some testimony from all sides before making a decision, but it is something that concerns me. We want law enforcement to have the ability to fight opiate abuse. The question is, how can we do that in a way that is sensitive to civil liberties and focuses the Fourth Amendment considerations properly?
Thanks, everybody.